Alright, hey guys, what's up, it's filtersc here, and I'm back for another video. If you guys remember, in the last video I said I was going to talk about the macro cycle, and as well as the micro cycle, and finally your multitask when you're talking about in-game. So today we're going to be taking a heavy look at the macro cycle, and what macro really is in Starcraft 2 and what you should be doing and spending the majority of your time focusing on. Now, I apologize in advance for the quality of the video in the background. It's taken from my live stream, which is always at a lower bit rate, unfortunately, than when I record for YouTube. Just kind of the way it works. It's easier to make a full fast video for YouTube. But that being said, it still looks pretty good, so we're going to take a look at it. The reason I'm doing it from a live stream perspective is so that you can take a look at a lot of my mouse movement and that kind of stuff as I'm playing the game, and it'll give you a better idea of what it really looks like rather than from replay, which is how I do a lot of my videos. In this case, it doesn't really work. So with that being said, in the last video we talked a lot about strategy and what the overall plan is going into the game. Going into this game, it's Terran versus Protoss, and I just played the guy 3 or 4 games before, and he actually kicked my ass pretty hard. And the way he did it was he used the Warp Prism with some Adepts and just kind of harassed me lightly. When I initially played the game, I thought that he was doing it like pretty hardcore. So when I moved out to attack him, I wasn't really respecting the potential of his army, which was a few disruptors and that kind of stuff. My army just got absolutely destroyed. So going into the second game, after looking at the replay and all that, when I hit him again, I was like, oh, okay. So I know he likes to do a little bit of harass, so I'll have to be a little bit more on my toes for that. I don't need to vary or change anything up too much about my build. I'm still going to go for a really fast command center and all that kind of stuff, right? So as you can see, I'm just opening up super basic, doing a lot of scouting with my SCV just to make sure he is expanding, and hopefully he'll be doing something a little bit similar. If you notice, I've got my gas already. That's going to be for a rather quick reactor. Based on his expansion timing, stuff like that, I felt pretty safe to be able to go ahead and do something like that. The one major mistake there is sending my SCV to make the supply depot when it already had 100 minerals. You actually want to send the depot or send the SCV out a long time before that. Otherwise, you'll end up in a situation like that where you run into the chance of getting supply blocked for a little bit as the SCV finishes up, which is actually going to happen to me here. So when we talked about strategy, we said, what's your overall game plan? Now, my game plan against Protoss, as it is right now, is I like to open up with, quite a few Marines, just to handle, any kind of Stargate play, stuff like that. Usually get a bunker up at the front. I'll get a fast factory, and I delay my starport a little bit, and I like to work in a second barracks usually. And the reason I delay my starport is because I'll get a cyclone, and I'll use the cyclone to deny stuff like oracles, to deny, war prisms and that kind of stuff. And it's actually proven quite effective for me, and I've really been enjoying it stylistically. And when you get into the game, you notice how I did a little bit of scouting with my SUV, but I wasn't sat there like over microing. My 100% of my focus right now is just going on to making sure I'm constantly producing units. I'm getting my build order up correct. I'm making sure that I am not, building my stuff all over the place and is super sloppy. I don't have, 1,000 rally points in the wrong place. I don't have too many SCVs in my main. Stuff like that is really, really important. And you need to take care of that before you go to, screw around with microing and stuff like that. Yes, it'd be easy to take the Cyclone out on the map and try to pick off a stalker or two. But A, that's not the point of my Cyclone. My Cyclone's a defensive unit. And then B, if I'm screwing around microing my Cyclone, well, it might look cool and it might feel cool. If I'm missing a bunch of macro cycles back at home, that's going to end up hurting me quite a bit. So from what you can notice, like, I'm spending almost all of my time just staring at my base and really, not doing much else. And that's kind of what you want to do at the start of a game of StarCraft 2, especially depending on what your strategy is, right? In my case, I'm not trying to be the aggressor. I'm not trying to do any crazy drops and really push my opponent with multitasking. I just want to get a good, solid lead with my macro. And I end up doing that, and it ends up, paying off quite well for me. And there you go, you got the Cyclone out, just throw it on patrol and not do too much more with it. Again, constantly making workers, trying to avoid the supply blocks so we get a few of them there. Keeping my money low, though, again, gas is going to bank up a little bit, but it'll get dumped fairly quickly as you start to get stim, your upgrades and all that kind of stuff up. And I'm really not doing much else around the map, but this is still taking basically all of my attention, right? Anybody that's kind of familiar with a vehicle or a car, when you talk about cornering, one of the worst things you can do when you're already in a corner, especially if you start to slide, is hit the brakes harder because your tire only has essentially 100% traction, right? And if 100% of your traction, if 50% is being used for your brakes and then 50% is being used to turn, that's what's going to create your skid. But if you lift off the brakes, although it sounds kind of counterintuitive, 100% of your tire ends up getting used to make the corner, and you're able to make the corner at a much higher speed than you normally would. The same sort of thing applies when you're talking about a game of Starcraft 2, right? What we're doing in this game is I'm spending basically 100% of my time working on macro, and I'm still getting supply blocked here and there. I'm still making mistakes with my build. My money is still floating up a little bit too high. My extra barracks, for instance, should already be down. I shouldn't be waiting to put them down, right? There's still a bunch of mistakes here that need to get cleaned up, and that's without spending more APM on silly stuff like micro and multitask and things like that. My cyclone could probably leave my base now, but I'm really not doing a lot with it, right? I'm still keeping it home defensive because I have so much to do. And that's what you really need to do when you focus on your macro, is just make sure you're getting your workers out, make sure you're not supply blocking, make sure you're getting your extra production down, and you're going to find you're going to be in a much better place for the game. That was actually one of the things that I noticed when I played my opponent previously, is that my macro slipped by, it wasn't a huge amount, but my macro definitely slipped, and that played a major role in terms of who won and lost that game, right? So as you can see, we're getting ready to go out and secure our third. I still don't really have the upgrades and army composition and stuff like that I'm looking for. I'm starting to get a few medevacs out, but if you notice one key factor, I really only have 2 barracks, right? My next 3 barracks that I'm making haven't been produced yet, and this kind of leads into the macro thing. So when those barracks finish, I'm going to put a bunch of add-ons on them, but if I move out with that army and it dies, I really can't replace it very quickly because my extra barracks are not online yet, right? So it's something small and simple, but I have to keep that in mind as I'm playing the game, right? And it looks relatively simple and easy to do, and for the most part conceptually it is, but if you start wasting and breaking off 2, 3, 4 minutes of your game and heavily devoting it to something like micro that doesn't really have a big payoff, right? Like if I pick up those medevacs and fly around and try to drop them, and I pick off a couple of stalkers, maybe get a probe or 2 or something, that doesn't really matter, right? Unless it really throws my opponent off or something, that's not going to matter if I make a bunch of mistakes at home, right? And, this is a good example. Let's say I was out with those medevacs, like flipping around and stuff. Maybe I missed the warp prism instead of spotting it on my mini-map and taking it out before it is able to do anything, right? So just very simple, small cues that, kind of let me go through the game and make sure I keep my macro on track and make sure that I'm putting myself in a good position to win. The scan that I'm throwing down now is a very simple scan. The whole purpose of that scan is just so that I can spot an observer. So, if it's not there, then I know he's not keeping tabs on my army. Maybe I can move it out. Maybe I can go for drops. There's more stuff I can do, right? But again, I'm purely just macroing up. You can see how low my money is, 200 is excellent. That's going to help me a lot as things go along. I've been able to do something like delay combat shield, right? And I've delayed combat shield to the point where my +2/+2 is going to be starting soon. But when those upgrades all kind of line up, my army's going to hit a nice big power spike, and it's going to be very, very powerful. And you're going to see an example of that when it comes to the actual engagements. But this is the first 8 minutes of the game, and we're just going to take a quick second here, and we'll pause it in just 1 second as things start to come online, and kind of go over what we've done so far within the game and talk about your own macro cycles and what you're kind of doing to get yourself ahead. Right now, here comes the warp prism, so we're just going to pause it again. Okay, so you notice we supply blocked pretty badly on 141. If I didn't do that, I'd be in even better shape, but that stuff does tend to happen, so I'm not too broken up about that. But if I look at the first 8 minutes and 30 seconds of the game, really the only microing I did was, a decently solid scout of my opponent. I also scouted to check for, make sure he's taking a third base and what his army composition was, and I did that with my Cyclone. I also checked to make sure he wasn't being overly greedy, and just getting a little bit of feedback on what my opponent's doing. Again, I'm not overly concerned with what he's doing. My main focus is if I can get to the right composition for my army, I'm going to be able to win the game and hopefully win the fight that will inevitably ensue. And this is something you really have to look at in your own games, right? This is an extreme example because, quite often if you're playing another matchup like a TVT or a TVZ, there's going to be more action. You're going to be fighting a lot earlier than you are in this game. But in the case of this game, I'm actually hedging towards a bigger, larger army fight. And the one thing I'll say is when you get to those big, huge fights, those are much, much more difficult to micro. And we're definitely going to go over the fights in this game a little bit. to show you that. But the larger the armies get, the larger the fights get, the larger the game gets, the more units are involved, the harder the micro is, the more difficult the micro gets, even though it's a lot less flashy than, picking off a few banelings with some marines and really basic stuff like that. Some of those splits with, there's only 30 units on the field. But if you start talking about splitting when there's 200 max supply on both sides, that's when the game gets a little bit crazy, right? So my micro is going to have to be up to the task, and it's going to be very, very important in this game. As is, multitask is not too much. I do have to kind of clear up the drop as I move out, so I have to clear up these adepts, clear up the warp prism, and that kind of stuff when I go to move out, and you're going to see that. But the multitask doesn't come into it that much. I'm able to kind of keep him away from my base and not let him put me in a situation where I have to do more with my APM than he does, right? That's what multitasking your opponent really is. So we're going to hit play on this game again, and when I say that, I don't mean for multitask. That really doesn't mean, like, the human is really not capable of any pure multitask. That's, factually just can't really do it. What you can do, though, and Parting versus TY was a great example of this if anybody caught it at DreamHack, is put your opponent in a situation where he has to do more micro and he has to worry more about his stuff than you do. A good example there is I just took my Liberators and attack moved his Warp Prism, right? If he didn't warp in some Stalkers and think, fairly quickly on his feet, he could have lost the Warp Prism and all pressure's gone on the map, right? But he does do that. He ended up, when I looked at the replay, just rallied the Stalkers back to his main army, right? So when you're trying to out-multitask your opponent, it's you take a big fight in the middle of the map or whatever, and in the middle of that fight, that's when you send your drop in, right? And you have to be capable of pulling the drop out or pulling the drop back if there's a bunch of defense up there. But if your opponent doesn't have anything, and a lot of players are really guilty for just mass rallying everything forward, even when it's not safe, you'll notice in this particular game. So the first thing is, obviously we scan him. We get lucky by seeing the Warp Prism, so I'm able to send some Liberators to deal with that. Sorry about that. There we go. Yeah, there's the Warp Prism. We're going to take it out. And if you notice, what he's trying to do is just distract me a little bit, so hopefully he can engage my main army, because he knows, not a lot of it came back. And I'm just really quickly going to pause the video here, because this is a great example of what you need to do within a game. So the first thing I did was I took care of the Warp Prism, took care of the drop, made sure that was shut down and nothing was going to happen. And when I do that, then I know I'm fairly safe to start rallying my units forward, right? I don't have to worry about the Warp Prism flying in and dropping units in my base. That means I can rally and reinforce my army, which ends up being a key factor in this game. If I don't kill the Warp Prism, and I know it's still out on the map, right, then I have to rally all of my units kind of in the middle between my main and my third base, because if I rally them to the fight, all he has to do is, throw a big warp into my production, and I'm probably never going to be able to stop it. However, in this case, we take the Warp Prism out, so we're able to rally forward. This is the second part. So when people talk about micro, they talk about the really flashy stuff, right? Well, this is an example here where I set up my army. People talk about, hotkeying all these different army groups and hotkeying everything all differently. It's really not that big of a deal. What you do want to do, though, is make sure your army's not in a big ball. That's actually what happened to me in the previous game. I wasn't paying attention. He hit me with a bunch of disruptors. My army got rocked. This game, I'm taking the time to spread my army out before, a fight or anything happens, before my disruptors get there, right? So I spread my army out, and it's not an amazing spread or anything, but it's still difficult for him to engage into, especially with disruptors, and get those big juicy hits, right? And here we go. Now he's looking for the engagement, right? Now, if you notice, what I did was grab my army via boxing and pull it back, right? And I boxed from the left to the right. So you can see my real mouse here. And I boxed from the left to the right, and I clicked it back and pulled the stim. That means I'm not over-stimming the rest of my army, right? Because, these units don't need to be stimmed. They're not actually doing anything. These guys are being stimmed to pull back, right? So this is kind of the micro phase. And it's not, adding 900 different units to hotkeys, which is a question I get asked a lot. It's literally jumping to my army with a double tap of my one hotkey, which is my main army, which is loosely grouped together, and then boxing to make the fight, right? And really need to pay attention to mouse movement here, because that's where it gets really, really important. So we'll play it out, and you can see I'm pulling my army back. Again, another box on a small group of units to stim them and pull them back. And then again, we're pulling everything back this time to try to get a concave, and that was actually a big mistake. I should have done that in separate boxes. And you're going to see me desperately scramble to try to spread my army back out. You notice my opponent has also done a really good job of having his army spread out so that he maximizes his damage. And when you get to these late game fights, you don't necessarily want to be sitting there target firing stuff. You want to spread your army out so you get 100% of your damage output instead of like 50, because half your units are trying to target fire and they can't move. So as we'll play this out, you can see I'm spreading my army out into a big group, so I have a big concave and I'm maximizing my damage. At the same time, my opponent's disruptors are coming in from the bottom, but my liberators are now joining the fight, and if you noticed, I have them selected right now, and you see I don't have a hotkey for my liberators. It's literally a control selection, and then I'm setting them up with E, and you're going to see that. Right, so get all of those set up, and while I was doing that, unfortunately some disruptors came in. Luckily the hits weren't too big, although they were fairly strong. But not much I can do about that. They're powerful units, and again there, same sort of thing, pulling the units back that are involved with disruptors, and this fight starts to look like it's going really poorly for me. But because I took the time to set my liberators up properly, and I'm able to rally in my bio for reinforcements, I'm going to end up being okay. There's a couple of big hits on his side, but on my side I got a lot of good shots off too. And again, you're going to see like we're doing boxing, pulling the army around. Now it's on a much smaller scale of fight. I can start doing a lot more in terms of boxing small groups of units. If you notice, I only have one liberation zone up, right? So we're going to start pulling our liberators forward too. In this case, I was initially trying to gun for the disruptors, but I wasn't able to get them, and I just took out the immortal, maximized my damage, and this is where the rally comes in. You can see I've got more army coming in from the back there. We've got a couple of liberators with us. We're going to take the time to just box select them, and again, we're box selecting our army a lot. And my micro is not the best, and certainly not even, I wouldn't even classify it as all that good. But all this box selecting is very, very important. Again, hotkeys are important. They mean a lot, especially in the early game. However, when you're starting to talk about these fights, it's all about that mouse movement, right? And again, we've got a smaller group of army. We're focus firing a pylon. We've got another box coming up because the disruptor shot's coming in. You're going to see me box my army. If you notice, my strength is boxing top left to bottom right, or bottom right to top right. I'm actually okay boxing like this, but I cannot box in this direction at all. It's something I need to work on. But you need to be able to box from all sides so that you can always have your mouse. If I have my mouse do this and then right click, it's a very efficient movement, and you're going to see it, right? Again, we're pulling back. We're keeping the arc of our army. That disruptor hit, we were actually able to focus fire the disruptor out. I don't know if you guys know that. If you kill the disruptor before the disruptor ball goes off, you're not going to take damage from it. And again, now we're going to focus fire the pylon, right? And because none of the other units are warped in yet, I can afford to focus fire the pylon. I'm not wasting damage by doing so. I'm not overstimming my units again. I'm going to kill his nexus. I'm going to set up my liberators so they're in a great spot, and we're going to be in pretty good shape overall. If you notice, right here, a little bit of a blur. This is DTs. I spot the Dark Shrine at the same time. I actually got lucky with this placement, but we're going to push the units forward. Again, quick scan. This is actually one of the nice things. The Marauder buff actually helps against stuff like DT and Archons, especially Archons. Marauder nerfs, sorry. Helps a lot against Archons, funnily enough. Of all the things it doesn't do well, it helps against Archons. Now, this is the key moment. You notice how when I killed his 4th base, I've killed his Dark Shrine, and I'm putting a lot of pressure on him, and I'm able to kind of rally all my units forward. When that's all happened, that's fantastic. I've got a lot of units in production, all that stuff's happening, but I haven't been able to land my 3rd base, which is huge, and I did have, multiple opportunities to do it, but we have to go back and take care of our macro. In this case, it's landing our command center, because it doesn't matter if I kill his 4th base, if all I do is sit there and dick around microing those like 6 or 7 Marauders. I need to take advantage of that by going to land that. If I don't go land that command center, it doesn't matter what else has happened in the game, right? So we're going to pick the command center up. We're going to go land it at our 4th base. Again, there's a misclick on it, but we did take it out. And now we can go back to microing our units because we've got a ton rallying forward. I don't really need to build or do anything else. I just need to finish the game because I know I've put a big, huge dent in his economy. And again, a lot of this is just box selection. We're not doing a lot with hotkeys. You saw a quick rally of barracks. They're a little bit overqueued, but that's okay. If you notice, my medevacs are starting to get low on energy. That's actually something you need to pay attention to. And in the game, I was watching it, so I was trying not to stim my army that much. And in this particular case, what we're doing, you saw my camera quickly jump between all three bases. That's because of my camera hotkeys. That's why my bases are organized in the first place. And again, I know I'm killing him, but I need to secure another advantage. So that's why I'm throwing down another command center, right? So we're going to grab that. And you're going to see me start to rally my SCVs down now, right? So all that while the fight's going on. You notice I didn't pull away from the fight. I sat in my liberation zone and fought. So my army's still doing damage. The fight's still good, but I'm not full on engaged. Could a disruptor have showed up and taken out a lot of my bio? Yeah, you know, it could have. But at the same time, if that bio dies, I've got lots more on the way. It wouldn't be the end of the world. It's much better to have those extra bases secure and that money spent. Right? And this is kind of the part where he realized game's over, and we're able to collect the victory. Now, there wasn't a lot in terms of multitasking in that game, but there was an awful lot in terms of correct micro and how you should be approaching your micro, just maximizing your unit's damage. You know, again, it's not flashy, and it's not like the craziest stuff you're ever going to see, but that's important. You don't necessarily need to be all that flashy with your micro. It's almost entirely about macroing and powering up and then getting to the micro stage of the game. When you finally get there, or there's something important in micro, you know, it's okay if your macro slips a little bit, but you do have to go back and take care of it. The best players in the world are able to do, you know, number one, they're not going to make mistakes with their macro like I did in the game. You know, I had a bunch of supply blocks and stuff like that. That's garbage. That's not going to help me. Number two, those same players, they're going to take those fights in quick bursts, and then they're going to macro. They're actually going to look back at their base. When you look at the first-person cameras, you know, as soon as the engagement's kind of started and there's not really a lot left, you know, the disruptor shots are fired, you've dodged them, you know, there's no High Templar coming for Storm, your army's set up, it's firing. That's when you have a couple seconds to go back and throw down a command center. And it doesn't sound like a lot of time, and it's not. But if you throw that command center down and then you micro for another minute, the command center is going to be basically finished by the time you go back and look. And that's kind of the lesson, right? You have to divide your time very, very well when you're playing the game of Starcraft 2. You know, micro is incredibly hard to start to get good at. And realistically, I spent my first 4 years of this game being absolute trash when it came to micro because I had my mouse DPI set just far too high. My mouse was jumping around. I couldn't control shit. I couldn't click on small units. I could barely click on the play button for the game. So the only thing I could really do is macro. When I dropped my mouse DPI all the way down to 600, you know, I was able to suddenly start microing really, really well. And, well, relatively well anyway. And it ended up helping my game a ton over the last year or so when I finally started to get that under control and checked out. So anyway, guys, this is filtersc. I know this is a little bit of a weird video. Again, apologies for the quality, but hey, we got to get it done. And I will see you guys with the next one. Make sure you take care and have yourselves a good one.